Welcome to Ancient Geeks, a podcast from a couple of geeks of a certain age. We look at the development of geek culture through the lenses of our youths and informed by our decades of geekery. We were geeks before it was chic. Pay no attention to the giant clones in the corner. I am your co-host, Stephen Taylor.
And I'm your co-host, Tom Grant.
Today on Ancient Geeks, we're looking at Star Trek, the animated series. So, Tom, a new adventure and a new week. But before we get into the TAS discussion, what's new for geekery for you this week?
So I watched Dracula's Daughter. We haven't done an episode on the Universal monsters. We did the 50s B movie monsters, but we haven't done the Universal monsters yet. I'd never seen it before, and it was fun. It was really good. It took up right where the original Dracula left off, like with Van Helsing in the room after having staked Dracula, and the police show up and say, "What the hell is going on here?
What's all this then?"
What's all this then? The other thing I just wanted to mention quickly, it was just that Peter David passed away, and since he contributed so much to so many of the franchises we love, Marvel Comics, Star Trek, and so forth, I thought it was worth.
I'm glad you remembered to do that. We probably could do a whole, not quite of our youths, but of our sort of middle-aged geekery, I suppose. Peter David was
the middle
a substantial author of the Ancient Geeks to the middle years,
as opposed to the fading years that we're in now.
That's right. But I mean, one of the things that Peter David was an excellent comic artist. One of the things that I always thought was true about Peter David when it came to the novelizations that he wrote, that he was one of the best, if not the best, at being able to take an existing property and really speak to it and write in it in a way that was really felt natural, but also somehow additive. He's one that could bring forth characters and not feel like fan service, but feel like, oh, we're learning something new about these things.
Right. Yeah.
His Star Trek novels are great. If anyone's a Babylon 5 fan, if never read his Babylon 5 novels, I recommend you find them. They're excellent.
Yeah.
And they continue the story in a way that's quite satisfying. And his comic work was great. So yeah.
Yeah. So how about you? What have you been doing?
So my this week in geekery would be I finished the second season of the current iteration of Doctor Who, which if you're a Doctor Who fan, I'm sure you've seen and has been in the socials. While I think the second season was better than the first season, I'm kind of disappointed in RTD's return to the show. It's not been what I'd hoped for, but we'll see how things go. And right now it's in limbo because the Disney contract has not been renewed, and we're not sure when we'll get more Doctor Who, to be honest. So anyway, a conversation for another day.
Yeah, maybe they need a rest.
It's possible. It is possible. It's an argument to be made for it. And then, anyway, it's...
All right. Well, another day.
Another day. Yes. So having dealt with that issue, let's ask ourselves, what theme music would we have if we could afford the license this week?
Well, it would have to be the animated series soundtrack. God damn it, because I can't get that out of my head after having watched multiple episodes in the last few days. I hear that, especially like the cello heavy action music. I cannot get that out of my head.
Dun, dun, dun. It's dun, 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 dun. Yeah,
I have the I got that.
Yes, exactly. Yes, it does. It is sound wallpaper. Absolutely. Yeah, I was thinking, it could be the main theme, but really in some ways what I would want is to license the original theme song because I know it was for money, but it's a shame that they couldn't use the Alexander Courage theme song on the cartoon.
Yeah.
But yeah, and as you know, I mentioned offline and did find one example in Jason of Star Command. That music got used over and over again in a bunch of other Saturday morning things. I just couldn't find confirmed examples, but yeah, it's holy cow.
Well, this is the boundary between 60s and 70s television, right? Yes. So as we talked about with the 70s superhero shows, these studios were all trying to get away with as little expense as possible.
Yes. Very clearly indeed. Okay, so let's talk. I mean, let me give a little bit of background. I mean, I think most people know what Star Trek: The Animated Series is and was, but I think it's worth talking about for a moment. So we're talking about two seasons of cartoons that aired on Saturday mornings. It started in September of 1973 and ended in October of 1974. There are 22 total episodes. The first season had 16 episodes. The second season only had six. Um, to add to the ancient geekery of it all, the 50th anniversary of this was 2 years ago, so this has been around
Mhm.
for quite a while. According to Memory Alpha, uh, the folks at NBC figured out ex post facto that they made a big mistake taking Star Trek off the TV. That maybe it actually had a better ratings than they thought that it did, and so they wanted Roddenberry to revive it. But at that point, they sold or destroyed or lost the sets, and the cost of starting it over again was too prohibitive. Although I think this fits into a broader discussion that we'll have going on in some upcoming episodes about sort of this wandering in the wilderness of Star Trek in the 70s with the animated series, maybe a new TV show, and then eventually the motion
Right.
pictures and everything that happens after that. So I think this kind of fits into that history. It was remarkable insofar that it brought back the entire original cast of the show except for Walter Koenig, so there was no Chekhov in this show, but the rest of the folks were all there. Now, as we will comment, a lot of the voices were done also by those people, especially James Doohan and Nichelle Nichols and
Hmm.
Angel Barrett. There were some noteworthy guest stars like Mark Leonard as Sarek and Roger C.
Roger,
Carmel as
yeah.
Harry Mudd and Stanley Adams as Cyrano Jones and a couple other handful of guests, but mostly lots of internal voices. I was intrigued, and I knew that the show had been written by folks that had an association with TOS, and obviously DC Fontana, whom we'll talk about here in a moment, or Walter Koenig was allowed to write an episode, and the
Hmm.
aforementioned giant clones are part of that conversation.
Yes. We'll get there.
But I sat down because I'm a geek and a nerd and a whatever. I went through all the authors, and I was sort of shocked, not shocked, but I was surprised to find out that seven total writers for 10 total scripts had written on TOS. So it was even more than I had realized.
Hmm.
One of them was written by a guy who's tied for directing the most episodes of TOS, a guy named Mark Daniels. And here's your trivia for the day. Mark Daniels directed the first 38 episodes of I Love Lucy. So that's an interesting,
What
weird
a
fact.
Renaissance man.
Indeed. And then several other the authors went on to have other Trek connections. One of the ones that I noted, what's his name? Um, I'm losing him. Oh yeah, Larry Brody, who wrote the Magics of Magus 2, went on to write what I think is actually one of the worst episodes of Star Trek Voyager Tattoo, which is sort of the origin of Chakotay's tattoo. I find it a cringeworthy episode. Maybe we'll talk about that someday. And people like
Must we? Must we really?
Maybe not. Howard Weinstein, who wrote the Pirates of Orion,
Orion. We'll get to that too.
he went on to write a bunch of Star Trek novels, TOS, TNG, and some comics. And of course, I think it's noteworthy to point out we'll talk about as well. Larry Niven, an important science fiction writer we talked about before in the podcast, wrote an episode. So I think actually a remarkable set of folks, and even some
Well,
of the ones
DC
that I didn't
Fontana.
mention.
Yeah.
And DC Fontana wrote
Yeah.
yesteryear, and even the ones that I didn't have a previous connection, like one author went on to write a whole bunch of genre cartoons and stuff, including Doctor Who Big Finish production stuff, and other people had a substantial TV resume. So it's actually a substantially impressive array of writers for this thing. But and of course, the show does well. We'll come back to the fact the show does contribute quite a bit to the overall mythos of Star Trek. We can kind of deal with that, I think, as we go through this. But I guess I'll go ahead and ask the question: how did you first encounter Star Trek, the animated series, Tom?
Well, I was a kid who watched cartoons. I was getting a little old for it at the by then, but I still saw in the TV guide that certain shows were coming up. This is in the age when the TV seasons would start in the fall, and you'd be looking ahead to see what was interesting to watch. And then I saw, oh my God, there's going to be a Star Trek cartoon. and I religiously watched every single episode when it came on Saturday morning.
Yeah, I mean it. This thing, I should stop and dwell on this for a moment. I didn't really think about it when I was preparing for the discussion, but it is worth noting, right? That as we think about within the theme of ancient geeks and the theme of what it was like to consume this kind of stuff when we were kids, right?
Yeah,
Several things come to mind. As you point out, one, every fall there was a new TV season, and that's
right.
when all the new TV came out, and
Right, including cartoons. There would be
including
a slate
cartoons.
of new cartoons.
And you found out about the newspaper and probably in the TV Guide, which was an important insert in
Hmm.
the Sunday paper every week. Whatever, you could buy the actual TV Guide magazine, but just whatever they called it in your local paper. And there would be an advertisement every sometime in the late summer of here are all the new Saturday morning cartoons that are going to be coming out. They even would do specials where they would like preview them.
Yes.
Um, and it's it's almost it almost sounds bizarre and foreign now because none of it works that way anymore. But this and Saturday morning cartoons were a big deal, right? This was this time that was on the networks where if you got up before your parents, you got to watch. And we've mentioned before, we mentioned last week, Scooby Doo, but we talked about the Super Friends before, and of course just a whole panoply of cartoons, many of which using the same sound effects as the ones that were
Yes.
in this. But still, a remarkable amount of a very kid-centric and programming. And I was the same way. I mean, I encountered it. I was younger. I mean, I was 5 years old when this premiered.
Hmm.
I'd already encountered the original Star Trek, although I was thinking back, it's entirely possible that I saw some of these animated shows before I had seen every episode of TOS, but I know I'd already started watching it, and I was excited about the cartoon because of the live action show. And I know I remember watching it because it used to rerun it even after the two seasons ran um, on Saturday morning. They did repeat them for many years after, as
Right.
it was wont to do. So I consumed them over a period of time. So yeah, same kind of deal. So so I guess the question is, before we talk about maybe episode specifics, but what was good and bad about this to you?
Well, it really felt like Star Trek.
Yes,
Yeah, the costumes were the same. There wasn't this transition in wardrobe that happened when a new series started. They just kind of treated it as part of the existing series as if they had had another season,
yes.
but with obviously shorter stories that could fit into a half-hour cartoon. It was great to hear the cast, the original cast. I don't recall missing Chekhov.
No,
Sorry, Walter. My younger self just wasn't too turned off by that. In fact, it seemed interesting that they had the kind of the replacement being a very different alien that they couldn't have done in the live action TV series
that's
because he
right.
had 3 arms and 3 legs and just looked very different. And that's something I also really liked was at the time uh, the show was clearly doing things with animation that the live action show couldn't have done. Weird spaceships and very alien looking aliens and lots of things that just would have not worked on a live action show, even with one with as good a budget as the original Star Trek series had. And the voice acting I didn't love. At the time, it was kind of uh, a, a niggling detail that got under my skin. The bad animation, the very stiff, as few frames per second as you could possibly do, kind of animation was a little bit of a turnoff. But I didn't complain. I still watched every episode and was often very pleasantly surprised by some of the great scripts and occasionally horrified by some of the bad ones. But that was true of the original series too.
That's true. No, I agree. I mean, I think that the general continuity, at least of the characters, the character design, and the Enterprise, and some other elements like the Klingons and what have you that come back was really nice to see. It is and arguably fits into the 5-year mission that we saw in the
Hmm.
started in the live action show. I thought the voice acting of the main cast was actually pretty good on balance. Some of
Right.
them are better at it than others. That but yeah, there was a little bit of some of the ancillary characters were sometimes a little more questionable, shall we say.
Yeah.
The animation, I mean, I don't, I wouldn't say that it was terrible in the sense that it just, I find it watchable still, but it is quite simplistic, as you say. And some of it's almost comedic, right? There's the whole when they run toward the screen and their shoulders move and they kind of, I don't even, it's,
Right. Or if they're talking to like the pirates of Orion, there's a shot of the captain and his first officer, and they don't move at all, right?
that's
So
right.
except
That's
for the
right.
mouths move a little bit, but
There's,
otherwise they are just completely motionless.
yeah, it is occasionally like that Conan O'Brien bit that he used to do with the pictures and the mouth that moves.
Oh yeah, well there were actual cartoons that did that.
Yeah, there
Yeah, I
were.
know. Yeah, wasn't that like
Um,
Crash Cargo or what was it that
yes,
had
yes,
the
that's right. That's in fact
yeah.
that's what they yeah that's where that was
So
the inspiration for the Conan thing.
right. So for listeners, there was actually a step down even from this filmation animation, which was have a picture that's been hand drawn by somebody and then superimpose the lips of an actor on it. It was really bizarre
It
and and
was.
and and disturbing and almost like a body horror sort of way.
Yeah, a different kind of uncanny valley.
Yes.
But yeah, but yeah, and again, you're totally right, and I can hear it in my head right now. The musical cues because there's so few of them.
Yes.
Um,
And they're so they were repeated
yeah,
many
they were
times in the same
just
episode across
over and
many
over again.
episodes.
In fact, I found, and I will post at some point, either in anticipation of this episode or after this episode drops, I found a YouTube video which has all of the music, and in fact, you can click through if you want to
Yeah.
relive particular musical cues. I mean, you're the guy that made what was it? You made your text you said before the William Shatner thing.
Oh, yes, Mr. Tambourine Man.
So you're
That
the
was
guy that
my
made
I've received a text message. Mr. Tambourine
yeah.
Man would
So I
just like
mean,
blast out of my phone.
so if you're the guy that would do that, surely you would use some of these TAS music cues for your phone sounds.
I've fallen down on the job, clearly. Well, and so the other thing I'll mention is I think the callbacks to the original series were good.
Yes, yes.
That it wasn't just like some of the very explicit things like having Cyrano Jones and Harcourt Fenton Mudd back on, but there were other things too that just kind of like felt that that was actual continuity from the original series, which even though I was a kid, did matter to me because I loved Star Trek at this point.
Yes, that's right.
And the animated series seemed to occupy this interesting space. It was clearly not childish in the way that HR Puff and Stuff and Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids or cartoons of that vintage were. But there was this set of cartoons that were not exactly adult, but were a little more mature, like Johnny Quest.
Hmm.
And I also put down the Herculoids, which is sort of a weird superhero, sort of He-Man meets
Hmm.
dinosaurs sort of show. There was like the original the Spider-Man series that came out that were just like a little bit more mature, and this was even more mature than that.
No, it doesn't. Man, it doesn't come across as being made for kids, except for the fact that it was animated and it was 30 minutes on Saturday morning.
Right.
But I think it could appeal, and this is one of the things that I think about quite a lot as we go through this journey, and also I think about what media I might continue to consume. I mean, part of this is a lot of these are aimed at kids, right? I mean,
Hmm.
we've talked about comic books and we've talked about adventure movies and monster movies. A lot of it is aimed at a certain level, but I mean, you can make things that kids can watch that don't have to be super silly or simplistic,
Right.
right? Um,
They don't have to be a condescending adult's idea of
that's
children's
right.
entertainment.
That's right. I mean, and I don't think even have to explain. I mean, I was thinking about, and not to, because we're not quite, I don't want to transition too much into talking about individual episodes, but I'll go ahead and mention like Yesteryear, which is the one that gets the most accolades, which is the story about Spock having to go back in time to the Guardian Forever to fix his past. That's a pretty sophisticated notion for a 5-year-old to deal with.
Right.
But I don't remember being like, oh, I don't understand what's going on when I watched this thing when I was in elementary school.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take a whole lot of attempt to really explain it all. And it just tells the story.
Yeah.
And I think you can do that without it having to be like, okay, now we're going to go through some really tedious explanation, or it has to just be plain, you know, juvenile to do this story.
Yeah, and I put down a list of things that I were pleasant surprises on the rewatch for me that I
Okay.
had forgotten were really, again, not child's play.
Oh no.
Yeah. So, for example, the aliens, you had, a lot of the like the traditional Star Trek aliens, energy beings that could take over the ship or whatever. But you also had these, yeah, aliens like Bem,
Hmm.
the one that turned out to be actually not a single alien, but some sort of colony of organisms that could assemble itself into the shape of a humanoid, but then could detach parts of its super body as needed, which happened a few critical times in the course of that particular episode. You had like a new Klingon weapon that was using stasis technology, and it was again not something that as a kid I had any problem with. It wasn't like, duh, what's that? As you said, um, I think the giant rock monsters were actually kind of childish, but they were cool. In Mud's passion. Um,
Yeah.
they had and little things they also kind of threw in like the badges were different for a different ship. That was like a Star Trek thing, from the
Yes.
original series
Yes.
that the emblem that was on the shirt had a different shape than the
Yeah.
standard Star Trek swoosh, the
Yeah.
Enterprise
That
swoosh or whatever you
the
call it.
yeah the
The
Delta.
shield, the
Yeah.
Delta.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
word I was searching for.
The the swoosh. That's Nike.
Yeah,
That's a
I know.
different. That's a different
Well,
Starfleet.
when the Enterprise went by, it did make a swooshing
It did
sound
make a
effect.
swoosh. It did.
And it was the same damn animation every single time.
Yes, it was.
And of course, the holodeck, right? That was
That's right.
something that I remembered it from the time I watched it for the first time. Like I remember that. Oh yeah, there was an episode with the holodeck. Yeah, when somebody pointed it out years later, it's like, yeah, I remember that. That was pretty
That's
great.
right. Yeah, it was the rec room, but it was a holodeck, and it did the things the holodeck does.
Yes,
Yeah,
and
they're actually
threaten people's lives.
yes. It's never why exactly.
That's
But
what
there
it was
even
designed
was
for.
there was even it wasn't quite the arch from TNG, but there was a little console, and they had programmed it
Right.
in, and I was struck by that when I rewatched that one. Yeah, there's. I
Yeah.
mean, if you just think about things that were added to the show, right? I mean, just things that lived on. The holodeck is one of them. The first time we know that T stands for Tiberius is from,
Yeah.
I think that the one you're talking, Bem, the one with the Pendronian,
Hmm.
uh, but that never makes it to screen until Star Trek 4.
Right.
But I remember I knew it for the long. I didn't know where I knew it from for the longest time, but it was from TAS. A lot of the Vulcan lore that we find later comes from yesteryear.
Yeah. A lot packed into that one episode.
An awful lot. There's the confirmation that Robert April was the captain before Christopher Pike. That's
Hmm.
from an episode of the animated series. That had been something that Roddenberry had written down somewhere, but in fact, there's a photograph of Roddenberry in a Star Trek uniform, and it says it's Robert April. But I mean but on screen, right? This on screen thing. I think that the fact that Spock's mother's last name is Grayson came from that episode. I don't think it was said in Journey to Babel, but I don't
I
recall for
don't. I don't.
sure. But
I don't remember that.
no, these little minor things. But I mean, it does. Then some of the stuff does spill over time. We do see references to Cations like Imres, the
Hmm.
feline communication software in Star Trek 4, and of course, Lower Decks is a whole bunch of homages to the animated series,
Yeah,
both in the
and the
89.
Kzinti. So I
Yes,
was,
yes.
I was a fan of the known space books by
Hmm.
Larry Niven. And so, for those who don't know, the Kzinti are this cat-like race that humans fought several wars with. Niven was always really good with his aliens, by the way. So,
Yes, he was.
they were definitely alien, and they played that up in the episode here that introduced the Kzinti. But then they clearly wanted to continue using them. Like it wasn't just, oh, Larry Niven, noted science fiction writer, writes an episode, and
That's
then
right.
his pet aliens kind of come and go. No, no, no. I mean, they mention them a couple of times in passing. You see
Yes.
in one of the episodes, the Sargasso Sea of Space one.
Hmm.
There's a Kzinti on the council of people who kind of govern this weird pocket dimension.
Yes.
Anyway, there's they were trying to build something there, is what I'm trying to say.
They were, and some of that again, part of this is just Easter eggs, for lack of a better word. But I mean, there is a Kzinti in lower decks
Hmm.
on the Cerritos. Riker mentions them in an episode of Picard,
Yeah.
and then they were supposed to be in an episode of Enterprise I read, but that didn't come to fruition.
Yeah, I was also reading that they actually might have been the new villain if Star Trek Enterprise had gone for another season, that
Mm,
they would have brought them in as the next adversary.
yeah, that would have been very interesting. Enterprise unfortunately got good right when it got canceled, but that's another discussion for another podcast.
Yeah,
But
also by the way,
yes,
that
please.
the concept drawing of a Kzinti spaceship I saw, I think it
Yes.
was on Memory Alpha. If you don't know, folks, Memory Alpha is this great
Oh,
site
yes.
for all
Fantastic.
kinds of Star Trek information. But anyway, it looked like, this is really deep nerd cut. It looked like the Kzinti ships from Starfleet Battles, which
Well, I
was
was going to
this
say,
board game. Yeah.
yeah,
Ba-
that the other sort of major way that Kzinti show up is in
mhm.
Starfleet battles, which
Right.
is because of the animated series.
Yeah. There's some sort of weird licensing thing that, that the people who did that board game were able to introduce the Kzinti along with the Romulans and, the Klingons and the Tholians.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. So let's talk about individual stories. What were some of your favorites or least favorites from all of this that you either watched or remembered from having watched before?
Well, yesteryear, definitely.
Yes.
So yesteryear had a great science fiction premise, a time travel story that starts with Spock coming back through the Guardian of Forever with Kirk, and nobody knows who he is. So clearly something's messed up in time, and they have to go fix it. It had all the Vulcan lore that we
Hmm.
talked about. Really fleshed out the Vulcans in a big way. Which, of course, there was Amok Time in the original series, and little hints of things in Journey to Babel, but Babel. I should know this, but I don't. But this is the most culture dump I think we ever got
Oh
of the
yeah.
Vulcans.
Oh yeah. And they did that. A lot of stuff that you see in that they absolutely build on Enterprise.
Yeah.
And elsewhere. But yeah, well, it's a one without even talking about it as far as it pertains to the animated series, but it's a great illustration of how much DC Fontana helped create Star Trek.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And she's given credit, but maybe not enough credit. And the Vulcans in particular, she had a substantial impact on.
Yeah, and it's a surprisingly emotional episode.
Yes,
It was like the second episode of the show.
it was.
So it was clear they were definitely not making the normal Saturday morning kids show because, I mean, there's a sad old Yeller moment in it.
That's right. That's right.
That I remember as a kid just thinking, wow, that kind of hit me hard.
Yeah, actually, it occurs to me too. There's stuff in the 2009 J.J. Abrams Star Trek about Spock's upbringing that is clearly influenced by
Yeah.
this episode.
Hmm.
Yeah, I had watched it. It's probably the one I've watched the most for I guess obvious reasons, but I rewatched it again just this morning to make sure I had refreshed my memory adequately. And I was struck that really it absolutely could have been an episode of
Hmm.
a live action version of this without any trouble whatsoever. It is totally played straight. It is, I think, taken seriously by the actors.
Hmm.
and obviously by the writer. I mean, the closest thing you could say is it features some Vulcan children, so maybe that's supposed to appeal to kids, but it didn't feel pandering to me.
Right.
Although I was cracked up by the one fat Vulcan who looked like a sumo wrestler,
Yes.
and and I'm not sure what that costume they're wearing, where it's basically like a sash, but there's no shirt, and I don't know. It was
Well, they're like a little gang,
yeah, they were they were
little Vulcan thugs.
little Vulcan thugs. Um, so yeah, that episode, I think that is the best. But
Mhm.
I so are the any other ones that really struck you as is particularly good or interesting?
Well, I thought the Pirates of Orion was
Yes.
actually better than I remembered.
Hmm.
It the thing we're joking about here is instead of saying Orion like normal people, they spend the whole episode saying Orion.
Yes.
It
Yes.
wasn't that in Shatner inspired? Wasn't it that like he had mispronounced it and then everybody
I
else
I don't know that I
chimed
ever
in?
got a definitive reason why they messed it up the whole time.
I'm probably passing along a
I mean,
rumor, not fact there.
it wouldn't shock me. I mean, I can't remember. Have you watched all of Lower Decks?
Yes, I have.
So yeah, there's a whole bit about this in Lower Decks, which
Oh
actually
yeah,
I think
yeah,
quite amusing about
right.
the blue Orions and the green Orions and
Yeah,
and the Orions are not very bright. It's pretty hilarious, and they kept those ridiculous uniforms. I thought it was fantastic.
yeah. So I think that like the setup of it with the other ship, the freighter that gets attacked,
Hmm.
that was pretty cool, and it was just like a really that also could have been a really good
Yes.
episode of the actual series. Yeah, so I would cite that one. What about you? What anything else that you would
So I
say would
mean,
be good?
what I would, yeah, I think. Well, I thought the very first one, Beyond the Farthest Star, was very interesting because it allowed them to do things that they wouldn't have been able to do live action.
Agreed. Yeah.
And that one was written by Sam Peebles, who wrote the second pilot, the one that really brought us Star Trek, where no man has gone before.
And a great alien ship.
Yes, they did. Even though the animation was limited, they cl clearly took advantage of the fact that they could draw whatever they wanted.
Hmm.
So we see plenty of non-humanoid aliens and funky looking ships and while the backgrounds don't move much, I thought some of the backgrounds are actually sort of really nice paintings.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think one of the things that struck me, it's hard for me to say like my favorites as much as I don't have any that I'm like, oh my God, this was just terrible. Now
Yeah.
maybe you do, and maybe we should think about that some. But I was struck by, and I had not rewatched in a while. We'll comment on this, and I specifically asked you to watch it. The Magics of Megas 2,
Yes.
which is, well, in some ways, anticipates Star Trek 5 in a way. In some ways, it's a better story than Star Trek
In a way.
5.
Yeah.
But it struck me, I remembered watching it, but I'd forgotten the details. And it's somewhat amazing to me, and spoilers for the Magics of Megas too, but they encounter an alien race at the center of the universe, of the galaxy, who end up basically have been demons from Earth's past. One of them's Asmodeus, and then it ends up being this one guy ends up as
Right.
Lucifer. And it's really a story about tolerance and a story about, and this has ripped from the headlines, Tom. It's a story
Hmm.
about due process.
Oh, yes. It's definitely a story about due process.
And it's kind of amazing to me that that was on kids' TV in 1973 or 4, whenever that one aired.
Right. And they make the character who turns out to be Lucifer,
Yes.
they're called Lucian, just sort of a rogue. He
Yeah.
wasn't, wasn't bad. Again, what the story was all about, how filtered through secondhand, third hand, fourth hand information, it's
Yes.
easy to caricature people. It's easy to demonize them and so forth.
Yes.
But anyway, that was a surprise.
It's a story about tolerance, and it was a
Yeah.
story about, as was true about several of the other ones. Um, it hewed. What I was struck by, it hewed to the ethic of Starfleet and the sort of notion of learning about other cultures and having an open mind about them instead of just
Hmm.
assuming that everyone's, the enemy.
Yeah.
And again, maybe contemporary politics are weighing heavily on the way I view these things, but I was just struck by it. It really was kind of remarkable. And it didn't even feel preachy. It just felt like these are our values and this is how we're going to react.
Hmm. And
I don't know.
it also had Spock drawing a pentagram on the floor of the
Yes,
Enterprise
that's right. It did.
because anybody could do magic in this all
Yeah.
separate dimension.
Yeah,
Um,
it did remind me in that regard to Plato's stepchildren when they get the powers because they figure out how to,
right.
but yeah. But yeah, it was the pentagram. I didn't I did notice that too.
It also had like some of the classic Star Trek animated voice acting.
Mm,
So often you'd get, and it was usually doing like would do. There was a
yes.
grandiose voice, which
Yes.
you get this
Yes.
in just full throated measure. Just hello, friends, welcome. Ha 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 ha. Ha. Anyway,
Yes,
you get
yes,
that.
exactly.
I don't think they had the other voice, which was sort of like the sort of the Renfield voice.
Yeah, yeah.
Eh,
It's all whiny and kind of
hey humans, that sort of
yes, that's
voice.
the
You
one.
got that a
Yes.
lot in this show,
Yes.
but not in this particular episode. But it was fun. I mean, they packed a lot into the
They
episode.
did pack a lot in the episode.
And it didn't hold back.
No, they did not. Let's talk about speaking of grandiose voices,
Yes,
The Infinite Vulcan, which is the episode that Walter Koenig wrote.
it's a must watch.
It
Like
is
we,
a must
which
watch.
well, like if we said that really the best is yesteryear. Infant Vulcan's not the best, but it is a definite strong recommendation to watch.
Well, again, I made the joke at the top of the episode about the giant clones, and one of the
Yes,
aspects of this episode is there's a giant dude. You want to say his name?
Stavros Caniculus 5,
Yes.
which just rolls off the tongue.
Oh, absolutely. And then,
But Greeks are underrepresented in Star Trek.
well, there you go. And eventually a giant Spock, which is the
Right.
infinite Vulcan of the title, whose skeleton ends up in an episode of Lower Decks. But anyway,
Yeah.
on one level, it's an absurd episode, but it actually, again, it tries to take seriously what the Federation has accomplished in
Hmm.
this sort of 23rd century era of Earth. It makes a reference back to the eugenics wars, who apparently established
Yeah.
Canisius. The original was one of those dudes. But you've got plant life forms, and you've
Yeah.
got
A
um,
great plant-based
yeah.
alien species.
Although it's kind of hilarious that they like get weed killer out to go after
Yes.
the flying anyway. But I thought it was actually a decent story and was attempted to again take seriously Starfleet's mission and what it had accomplished in terms of peace and it ends kind of abruptly as one might expect for a 22-minute episode, but it's pretty good actually, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty good. And it also has an unexpected treat. I'm going to give this away, listeners. Skip ahead 30 seconds if you don't want to hear it. But you get to hear McCoy once again say, his brain is nearly gone, standing over Spock on a table.
Yeah, there was the Spock's brain of it all.
Yes.
Although this one's much better than Spock's brain.
It is much better.
Brain, what is brain?
What is brain? What other ones did you watch?
So I watched Yesteryear, One of Our Planets is Missing,
Hmm.
the Lorelei Signal, which the Lorelei Signal, that was one of the weaker ones. I will say that bless Majel Barrett's heart, whatever voice Majel Barrett was doing was just Majel Barrett doing her voice.
Yeah, kind of Nichelle
Um,
Nichols too.
yeah,
Was
Nichols, I guess I will say I guess Majel Barrett did MRS and she did this sort of wavery cat noise, which is a little bit
mhm.
different, but still. Yeah,
Not
Nichelle
that
Nichols,
not that
not,
different.
not that different. The one we just mentioned, the two we just mentioned, Infinite Vulcan and Majesty of Megas 2, Once Upon a Planet, which was a sequel to Shore Leave from the original
Right.
series. which again I think could have been a live action episode.
Definitely.
The Territon incident, which is when they start to shrink, which you couldn't have done really with TV at
Mhm.
the time. It
Hey, there
was
was
it was
Land of the Giants.
That's true. The Slayer Web, which we haven't talked about entirely yet, we've mentioned
Yeah.
though, and the Practical Joker, which is the episode in which the holodeck shows up. I will say the Practical Joker, parts of it felt the most juvenile slash aimed toward a Saturday morning cartoon audience.
Hmm.
Although ultimately, it still was an episode that could have been done. I mean, when Kirk's uniform says Kirk is a jerk on it was, kind of hilarious,
Yeah.
but also
Yeah.
very lowbrow. And the very, very beginning is everyone's laughing at kind of very silly jokes.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. And
and then
do you want to talk about the slaver weapon for a minute?
yes, let's talk about Slayer weapon for weapon, slaver weapon for a moment.
Slaver weapon. So to understand this episode, you have to know a little bit about Larry Niven's known space series, which
Yes,
is, kind of based on a lot of things. Like we mentioned, really alien aliens. There's a couple of species that are very prominent, the puppeteers and the Kzinti, especially, but also sort of like a deep history of the galaxy. There's a race called the Protectors that show up in a couple of the stories that are important. But then there was this slaver race that had psychic powers, and they had a slave species that they dominated, and there was an uprising, and everybody got killed. That's why there aren't any slavers around anymore. But in this episode, the crew that's on the shuttlecraft that gets diverted, kind of runs into these Kzinti who are after this weapon from this ancient slaver species. That they're trying to figure out what the heck it does, and it was well written. It
yes,
it not only could have been a Star Trek episode, it could have been another part of the known space series where the Star Trek Enterprise crew just kind of blundered into it, or maybe just strip off the Star Trek part of it and just have it be a regular old story from the known space series. It was really something to see that.
yeah, it was, and it was
Yeah,
impressive. Also from trivia, it's the one Kirk's not in,
yeah, that's right. That's right.
and the shuttlecraft is pretty funky looking. It's a different design,
Yeah.
but yeah, it yeah, because it features the stasis box and the idea that inside the stasis box, time is frozen,
Hmm.
but there might be basically treasures from the slaver time period in these boxes. There's weapons in there that they trying to figure out, and yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, there's
I,
sort of it was always you didn't know if you found one of these stasis boxes what would be in it.
yes,
It could be something great, it could be something that's a nothing burger, it could have been something that kills everybody who opens the box.
yeah, the one that I'd remembered, and I almost feel like it's also in one of the stories. The idea of a grenade in the process of exploding is in one of these boxes.
Yeah.
So you don't want to open that one. Um,
But anyway, it's just like another like pack full of cool ideas.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I, I kind of preempted this. I didn't intend to necessarily. Were there any you just felt were terrible that you watched? Which ones did you watch?
Okay, so I watched Beyond the Farthest Star, The Jihad I had watched
Oh, I watched
recently.
that one too, actually. I forgot to
Yeah,
put
I
it on my
think
list.
that's a pretty bad one. I
It's very linear and it doesn't make total
Yeah.
sense
Yeah, it was badly written, like why the bad guy turns out to be who he is. It's really
because
just
it could.
because it could. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that was not good. The Survivor, that was pretty good. That's the one, where they find this person who was thought dead, and there's something not quite right about him, and he has a fiancee that's not happens to be on the ship, and he kind of brushes her off when she says how happy it is that he's alive again. That was not great. That was not
That
the
one
best episode.
I did not rewatch that one. I have seen it, I guess, relatively recently, or I just remember it. I remember it. There's a because it's isn't it Christine Chapel that his Isn't she the love interest?
No,
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 it's
it's yeah, it's a
oh,
different
it's
different
somebody
crew
else.
member.
It reminded me of the Roger Corby story from
Right.
um, the episode whose name I can't think of right now with
The
Rock.
man trap. Oh no,
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 no.
no.
Oh, yeah, yeah. What are little girls made of?
That's the one.
Look at
Um,
us.
we might be geeks.
We might be geeks. So I saw that. That was okay. It was not great. Mud's Passion.
That
Um,
one,
yeah, yeah. The giant rock aliens are kind of fun, but otherwise, meh. More tribbles, more troubles. Okay, we already talked about Pirates of Orion. Oh, how sharper than the serpent's tooth. Once again, like Who Mourns for Adonis with Apollo. Here you have, some alien that had been on Earth that got turned into a mythological figure.
yes. That one, yeah, more Mesoamerican stuff, as I recall.
Yeah, so that other than the ones we already talked about, those are the ones I watched.
That's the one I believe they won the primetime Emmy, not prime, the daytime Emmy for.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that.
And in
Okay.
fact, so TAS is the only Star Trek series to win a non-technical Emmy award. It was a daytime Emmy, but still, that was the one for children's programming.
That's really sad.
I just
As good
report
as
what
Star
I.
Trek has been over
Oh yeah, that's.
hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of episodes, man,
Well, the Emmys are weird, man.
I know. Yeah. If they just had it, it made it into a doctor show, maybe.
CSI Vulcan.
Yeah, something like that. Okay.
But I would say this, and I would say that again. I have watched all of them. I went through and looked at some of the other summaries, and I don't think any of these are as bad as the worst third season episodes of TOS.
That's true. That's true.
So I guess I will then let me slightly transition the question. We've kind of answered it, but I'll ask it directly. I think my first question is pretty straightforward. Is this Star Trek to you? Which is to say, does it fit into, if you want to talk about it being quote unquote canon, or how do you think about that question? And I'll just go ahead and say, is it good Star Trek if it's Star Trek? Or if it's not Star Trek, tell me why. But what do you think?
I think it's good Star Trek. I mean, they had a different set of constraints to work under, but it was definitely Star Trek.
Yeah.
It was shorter. They didn't have as many actors. They had budget constraints. Like Walter Koenig wasn't on the show mostly because they couldn't afford him,
Hmm.
and so they had James Doohan do all the other voices. To me, the punchline about all of this is forget about Star Trek for a moment. Let's talk about the Twilight Zone.
Hmm.
Twilight Zone was a great show, a great anthology show.
Hmm.
Half an hour. They banged out some great stories, extremely memorable plots and characters. Just a classic show. And nothing ever really did it as well as Star Trek did. I'm sorry, as the Twilight Zone did. In doing exactly that
Hmm.
sort of show. Outer Limits was great, but it was in some ways a different sort of show. Like Twilight Zone would have these almost like morality tales with the twists at the end, and
Yes.
like the O. Henry like twist and so forth. It just had a different vibe to it than the Outer Limits, which was still a great show, but it was more like that was more like reading a mainstream science fiction story, in analog magazine or fantasy and science fiction magazine or so forth. And I don't think it was because people didn't try. I mean, there were like other Twilight Zone series that came out, and there were other anthology shows, but nothing ever really did Twilight Zone again as well as the Twilight Zone did. Star Trek could have been a one and done as well.
Right.
There could have been three seasons. They caught the lightning in a bottle, and it would have been hard to reproduce, and they would never have been able to do it again. Looking from the standpoint of the late 1960s, early 1970s, that could have been the epitaph for Star Trek. It was
Sure.
great, but no one's ever going to do it like the way they did it again. And really, the animated series showed there was a much brighter, more optimistic future for Star Trek. I mean, sure, it was a kid's cartoon with bad animation and music I can't get out of my head and and so forth, and we all laugh at it. But it really did prove that Star Trek was enduring.
No, I think that's a totally fair observation. And yeah, I to answer my own questions, I think it's good Star Trek and should be considered Star Trek and within the whole panoply of all these series. But and also to your broader point, which we'll talk about more when we talk about the movies, and we'll eventually
Hmm.
talk about Next Generation and other iterations of Star Trek. It really did help move along this enterprise, no pun intended,
Right.
of the show. And it did demonstrate there was more to do with these stories, these characters in particular, and with the format, and that it could live on. So I'm sure it does play an important role in that long-term evolution. Who knows how much did this lead to Star Trek Phase Two's development and eventually to the motion picture and then TNG. It's all part of a this lineage, this evolution. And of course, it strikes me again as I have made this point, I guess, multiple times. But when you're 6 years old, time is just a different concept than when you're in your
Right.
50s. And you realize that okay, this is 5 years after the original show had died, which is not really that long, but it seems like a gulf. And if you're in the middle of it as a fan or as a young fan in particular, it just seems like this eons of space between the original series, the animated series, and then another 6 years till you get to the motion picture.
Hmm.
But again, in the the grandiosity of time, it's or in a lifetime, it's nothing. But but you can see this evolution throughout this period, and there's no doubt that one helps build on the other.
Yeah. And how many times, have we thought that something that we loved wasn't going to come back? We
Yes,
had the anticipation, in this case, of our much younger selves,
yes,
over the summer, waiting for, when our sense of time was much different and summer seems to stretch on forever, our anticipation for what was coming in the fall. How many times, had that scenario happened and then we were disappointed?
oh
You
yeah,
know, yeah, and this didn't leave me feeling disappointed. And years and years and years and years later, looking back on it, I can still enjoy it.
absolutely, absolutely. So, anything else specifically about these 22 episodes that you want to talk about before I ask a couple other questions?
Why was Hal Sutherland's name so big at the end in the credits?
I don't know. In a
Yeah,
circle, right? No, it's
yeah,
like that.
that big florid way
Yes, the
of
big
putting
florid
his
way.
name on it. I didn't. Still a mystery to me.
Yeah, the ego of producers, I guess.
Yeah, whatever.
All right. So, one thing that I was going to talk about two things, maybe quickly, maybe not. There are an awful lot of fan films that have been based on this animation. I don't
Yeah.
know. I haven't looked at all of them because there are more than I have had time to look at. I know well, the two that struck me that I looked at last night were someone animated about a 5 minute chunk of Best of Both Worlds Part One in
Oh
a
yeah, yeah,
PNG, but all in the style with the same musical cues from that you've expressed your undying love for.
yeah. Either
Uh,
you sent that to me or I sent that to you. One or the other at
yeah,
some
and
point. Yeah.
then and the Borg cube is purple, which just seems perfect for. Um,
Yes.
and then there's one with Voyager too. It's from the episode where they go to
Hmm.
warp, they go to transwarp and turn into salamanders, and it's very strange. Um,
After mating, of course.
yes, of course.
Oh,
But there are a whole bunch of other ones which I have not partaken of, or the ones you sent me, which were fantastic. I've only looked at a couple of them where they have made these Mr. Spock's logic lessons.
they're great.
They're fantastic.
Yeah, look these up, folks. On YouTube. So Mr. Spock's logical fallacy lessons.
Yes,
Yeah.
something again this age could use quite a bit of.
Yes.
Um, so the last thing I wanted to talk about, unless there's some other fan films that I'm missing that you wanted to mention, was, as I alluded to earlier, the 50th anniversary of the animated show was in 2023.
Hmm.
And one of the things that Paramount did was they released these things called very short treks, which I think you only saw this week, correct?
Yeah.
So it's a series of very it's a particular, I think, kind of humor. And as I warned you, it was the same guy that produced that viral video from several years ago, maybe 10 years ago now, Too Many Cooks. If you don't know
Yeah.
what that is, especially if you're an 80s kid, I would absolutely recommend look up Too Many Cooks. Um, but so what struck you? Well, I'll describe them this way. There's a series of short videos. They feature not just the original TAS looking cast, but also they involve the Strange New Worlds and Voyager, all the Star Treks, right? TNG, Lower Decks, Prodigy, and Voyager. And DS9 have at least some representation in all these things.
Right.
So what
And,
was yours?
and multiple in the same episode, that holograms all the way down
Yeah, that one's
episode.
great. I love that one.
Yes.
I rewatched that one this morning. Yeah. I love the ending in particular. Who said that? But so what was your, since this is you just encountered for the first time, what was
Yeah.
your impression?
Well, I thought that was just a brilliant encapsulation of what makes Star Trek the animated series still lovable and watchable. So it kind of occupies that place where it's kind of like with the B monster movies
Hmm.
of the 50s, right? There's some aspects of it that are kind of ridiculous and regrettable, you know, because of budget constraints or
Yes.
whatever. But there's also something really cool. There's a kernel of something that's really great about it. Big ideas or kind of fun twists on characters that we didn't know everything about or whatever it is. And so I think that there's a little bit of condescension, I think, in those videos and some of the other ones that use the Star Trek animated series milieu, whatever you want
Hmm.
to call it. But there's also just a lot of real strong affection for it too.
No, I absolutely.
Yeah. So they were genuinely laugh out loud funny at times.
Yes, they were. The it's funny because he normally has legs.
Yes, right. Yes.
Anyway, I rather than describe or go through them, I will just say if you haven't watched them, I would recommend you do so. They are a little twisted, but
No,
I found them
also just like
enjoyable.
Star Trek managed to cast over the years a lot of people who are good voice actors
Yes.
that you see in the Star Trek animated series. All the main characters still, it sound good on,
Hmm.
in the animated form. But also like in the very short treks, like Ethan Peck is Spock.
Yes. Yes, he
Yeah,
is.
he's a fun voice actor.
Yeah, I was impressed.
Jonathan Frakes, who actually had, I think, a career, didn't he? Wasn't in like a lot of cartoons like
He
Gargoyles.
was, yes. I
Yeah,
don't remember all of them, but yes, he did quite a few after TNG, or maybe contemporaneously. I don't recall.
yeah,
In the 90s, yes, he did. I think some of the other TNG crew was on that show as well. But yes,
yeah.
he was.
So
And
when we were
Frakes,
saying, hey, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say Frakes has been, and I was thinking about it in watching the one where they do the song. But
Mm.
he's been, I think, a sort of really sort of fun long-term ambassador for the show, and
Oh
obviously been
yeah,
involved in all the directing that he's done with the TV stuff in the contemporary period. But he seems to have an affection for it all and for the people that he works with that is, I think, infectious.
yeah. I was gonna say we dumped a little bit on the voice acting before in the animated series, but it was more that they were trying their best to deal with the
Oh
budget
yeah, 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 yeah.
limitations. I mean, when James Doohan was Scotty, he was great. It's just like
Yes.
when he had to do the voice, or had to do the voice that it was clearly not the best moments of Star
Yeah,
Trek there.
some of the voice stuff was better than others, and he deserves some credit for having to carry a lot of that load.
Yeah.
But yeah, it there weren't
I
he
spent a day with James Doohan once, and I never asked him that question. Like,
it's too
what was it like to carry the load of the voice acting on the animated series. I blew it.
That's
We wound up
unfortunate.
spending up so much time talking about World War II.
Well, that's not a bad thing. I mean, we are recording this on the anniversary of D-Day.
Yeah.
And was he not, but wasn't he at D-Day?
He was at D-Day. That's where
That's
he
what I thought.
lost his part of his finger was
Yes, that's right.
in D-Day. He was with the Canadian forces.
Yes, yes. Not the Scots.
No.
Um, okay. All right. So the last question that I have sworn a blood oath not to forget again.
Okay.
Merch. Did you have any merch?
No, nothing existed.
That's right.
And I went back and I looked online to see if there were any things that I could have missed at the time, but I didn't, like again, we joked and said, like everything that was a geek property around this time had sheets, that you could
Yes.
put on your bed, but
Right.
I couldn't even find that. How about you? Did you
Yeah,
unearth anything?
so I had a memory of having some Star Trek coloring books, but I located them online and they were
Mm,
not the animated series. I still think maybe there was one, and I did find something, but I couldn't decide if what I'd found was something someone had made up ex post or was in fact a coloring book at the time. So in some ways, I think I've convinced myself of something that doesn't exist, but I'm not positive.
yeah, maybe there was like ViewMaster discs that we never encountered or
Yeah,
something,
that
but
could be.
I never had
I did
anything.
I did see something that I did not totally confirm, and I don't know if it's someone again kind of coming with an ex post explanation for something, but there was a convincing graphic that I saw that suggested that the Klingon Migo character's costume was based more on what was on the animated series and what was on screen.
That is such a deep cut.
Yeah, so I did have a Klingon, so maybe that counts. But
Okay.
that may be just the fact that the cartoon version of a Klingon uniform and a toy version kind of
Right.
converge. Um,
Anything you wish you had?
So the only thing that I would say is I would not mind having had or even having now some an actual animation cell of some of the maybe the cast or the crew or even the Enterprise. That would be cool.
See, I would
Although,
pick one of Stavros Caniculus 5.
well, of course, who wouldn't? Especially when he's looking down at them. Now,
Yeah,
like our conversation about posters that we had at some point. I do know that if I had a animation cell, it would have to hang in a very limited number of places in my home.
right.
But that,
Yeah, that would be a tough sell.
yeah,
Ah,
yeah.
ha, ha.
Well, on that note,
So I just want to say my one dream piece of merchandise would be a Salat doll,
okay, sure.
Spock's pet. That would be
I
cool.
chaya.
Yeah.
You're too fat, he tells him unkindly in that episode. You're too old and fat to go on this adventure.
Those
Uh,
bad Vulcan punks were rubbing off on him.
that's right. But anyway, yes. So, thus comes to a close, I believe. Yes, the latest episode of Ancient Geeks. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Oh no, those cat-like Kzinti are scratching at the door, looking for some salmon treats. So I guess it's time to bring this episode of Ancient Geeks to a close. Thanks for listening. You can find us on the podcast app or service of your choice. Please subscribe. And also, please leave a review. We definitely welcome the feedback. If you want to reach out to us directly, you can send a note to someancientgeeks@gmail.com. Also, look for us on Reddit, Facebook, Blue Sky, and other social media outlets. All content copyright 2025, Tom Grant and Stephen Taylor. Music by Reversed Image, whom you can find on Pixabay. See you next time.